The moment I opened the drawer and saw the receipt, I felt my stomach drop. My hands trembled as I picked it up, trying to make sense of the numbers. A car? Who spends 30 grand on a car without a word to their spouse? And why wasn't this receipt for my car, or something we discussed? Maybe it's a mistake, I tell myself, but deep down, I know better. My husband, Alex, had been distant for months. The late-night work calls, the sudden interest in his appearance, and the way he now avoided my touch. It all pointed to something, though I didn't want to believe it. Not yet. I set the receipt back where I found it, careful not to leave any evidence I'd been snooping. But my mind raced. Why hide such a big purchase? And who was the Aaron listed on the sales agreement? I'd never heard that name before, yet it was there, plain as day, attached to the vehicle registration. As I walked away from the drawer, my heart was pounding. I had to confront Alex, but how? The thought of asking him outright made me feel sick. If he denied it, I'd need more proof. And if he didn't, I wasn't ready for the answer. That night, I couldn't focus on dinner. Alex was his usual self, scrolling through his phone between bites of lasagna. "Work's crazy," he muttered when I asked how his day went. He didn't even look at me. "What about you? Did you do anything interesting today?" he asked. The question felt like an accusation, though I knew it wasn't. Still, my throat tightened. "Just the usual," I lied, forcing a smile. "Ran errands, caught up on laundry. Nothing exciting." His phone buzzed, and he excused himself from the table to take the call. As soon as he was out of earshot, I grabbed his phone from the table. Locked. Of course. The sound of his muffled voice filtered through the walls. He wasn't talking about work, at least not in any way I could recognize. "Tomorrow, yeah. No, it's perfect." She has no idea. My chest tightened. My legs carried me upstairs before I could hear more. I didn't want to hear more, not yet. Sleep was impossible that night. Alex had gone to bed hours after me, slipping under the covers without a word, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind playing his words over and over. She has no idea. Was he talking about me? I needed answers, but I couldn't rush into this blindly. If I confronted him without proof, he'd deny everything. I needed to be sure. The next morning, Alex left early, mumbling something about a meeting. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I jumped into action. My hands shook as I searched the house, starting with his office. Bills, contracts, even his laptop. It all seemed normal, but then I found it. Tucked behind a stack of folders was a box from a jewelry store. Inside was a dainty necklace, elegant but simple, with a tiny diamond pendant. It wasn't for me. I knew that immediately. Our anniversaries usually involved flowers from the grocery store or last-minute dinner reservations. He wouldn't splurge like this unless he had a reason. That receipt for the car haunted me. If the necklace wasn't proof enough, I needed to dig deeper. I grabbed his laptop, praying he hadn't cleared his browsing history. My heart raced as I scanned through pages of online purchases. There it was again, the car dealership, followed by an entry for a boutique clothing store in the city. Erin. Her name was on the receipt, and now my imagination filled in the rest. Was she younger? Prettier? What could she give Alex that I couldn't? I felt a mix of emotions, rage, sadness, disbelief. But beneath it all was a determination I didn't recognize in myself. If Alex thought he could humiliate me, lie to me, and get away with it, he was sorely mistaken. By the time he came home that evening, I had calmed down just enough to play my role. I kissed him on the cheek, forcing a smile. "How was your day?" "Busy," he said, ruffling through the mail. He didn't notice my shaky hands or the way my voice trembled. That night, while he showered, I slipped into the garage and took a closer look at his car. I found what I needed in the glove compartment, a pink keychain with a name engraved in looping cursive, Erin. I clenched it in my fist, anger boiling inside me. I couldn't take it anymore. Tomorrow, I'd follow him. I needed to know who she was. I needed to see it for myself. The next morning, I called in sick to work. If Alex had any suspicions about my sudden cheerfulness as he left the house, he didn't show it. "See you later," he said, giving me a distracted kiss on the forehead before heading out. His phone was tucked in his pocket, and I knew better than to try taking it. But today, I didn't need his phone. I had a plan. I waited 15 minutes after he left, then grabbed my keys and followed. My heart pounded as I tailed him through the familiar streets of our town. I kept a safe distance, my palms slick on the steering wheel. I'd seen enough movies to know how to stay unnoticed, but this was no movie. This was my life unraveling. He turned into a parking lot near a cafe I didn't recognize. I parked across the street and watched. A few minutes later, she appeared. Erin. She was young, much younger than me. Slim, with long, dark hair and a smile that seemed too eager. She hopped into the passenger seat of Alex's car like she belonged there. I watched as they pulled out of the lot and headed toward the highway. I followed them to a neighborhood I didn't recognize, upscale, with manicured lawns and luxury cars in every driveway. My stomach twisted as Alex parked in front of a 2-story house with a sleek black door. Erin led the way inside, holding the keychain I'd seen the night before. I stayed in the car, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. My mind raced. Who was she to him? Was this her house, or just another stop on their rendezvous? The questions burned in my head as I sat there, unsure of my next move. After about an hour, Alex came back out. Alone. He didn't look around, didn't check to see if anyone was watching. He just got into his car and drove away, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. I wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there, but I held back. Instead, I followed him again. This time, he drove to a dealership, the same one on the receipt. My suspicions were confirmed when I saw Erin's car, shiny and brand new, parked out front. The dealer handed Alex some papers, and they shook hands before Alex drove off, back toward home. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at that car. My anger bubbled to the surface. He had bought her this car, this expensive, perfect car, while telling me we couldn't afford new appliances or a weekend getaway. I clenched the steering wheel, fighting the urge to storm into the dealership and demand answers. Instead, I drove home. I needed a plan, and I needed to confront Alex when I was ready, on my terms, not his. By the time Alex walked through the door that evening, I was ready. My hands didn't tremble anymore, and my heart wasn't racing. If anything, I felt eerily calm, like the calm before a storm. He was in for a rude awakening. "Hey, babe," he said, kicking off his shoes. "What's for dinner?" I stared at him from the kitchen, gripping the receipt in my hand. "That's funny," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I was going to ask you the same thing about the car." Alex froze mid-step. His easy smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion, or maybe guilt. "What car?" he asked, feigning innocence. I held up the receipt, waving it slightly. "This car. The one you bought for Erin." His eyes widened for a split second before he recovered. "It's not what you think," he said, holding his hands up like he was defusing a bomb. "Oh, really?" I snapped. "Because what I think is that you've been sneaking around with some 20-something and buying her expensive gifts while lying to my face." "It's not like that," he said, his voice rising. "I can explain. Don't you dare insult my intelligence," I shouted, slamming the receipt onto the counter. "I followed you, Alex. I saw you pick her up. I saw the house. I saw the dealership. So, what's the explanation? I'm dying to hear it." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. Finally, he said, "She's someone from work. She's going through a hard time, and I was just helping her out." "Helping her out?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's the best you've got? You bought her a car, Alex. A car. Do you think I'm stupid?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, fine," he said. "I've been seeing her, but it's not serious. It's just something that happened. It doesn't mean anything." The words hit me like a slap to the face. Not serious? Doesn't mean anything? My hands curled into fists at my sides as I tried to keep my composure. "It means enough for you to betray me," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "It means enough for you to prioritize her over me, over us." "Look, I never wanted to hurt you," he said, stepping closer. "It just got out of hand. I'll end it. Okay? I'll fix this." I took a step back, glaring at him. "Fix this?" You can't fix this, Alex. You shattered everything. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I messed up. I'll make it right. Please, just give me a chance. I stared at him, searching his face for a shred of sincerity. But all I saw was a man who was sorry he got caught, not sorry for what he did. You don't get to decide when this is fixed, I said. This is my decision now. Alex stood there, his face a mix of desperation and guilt. I felt a surge of power I hadn't known I had as I held his gaze, refusing to back down. Your decision? He asked, his voice cracking. What does that mean? It means, I said slowly, that I'm done letting you dictate what happens in my life. You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and spending money on her while telling me we couldn't afford anything extra. You don't get to just fix this, Alex. You don't get to sweep this under the rug. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. I'll sell the car, he said, his voice hurried. I'll cut off all contact with her. I swear. I'll do whatever it takes. Why should I believe you? I shot back. How do I know you won't just find another errand the next time you get bored? I won't, he said quickly. I've learned my lesson. Please, just stop, I interrupted, holding up a hand. You've done enough damage. I need space to think about this, about us. Space? He repeated, his voice rising slightly. What does that mean? Are you saying you want to leave me? I let out a bitter laugh. You left me the moment you decided she was worth more than your loyalty. I'm just catching up. He reached for me, but I stepped back, my heart pounding. Don't, I said firmly. I can't even look at you right now. I love you, he said, his voice breaking. I know I screwed up, but I love you. Doesn't that count for anything? Love? I snapped. Is that what you call this? Because it doesn't feel like love to me. It feels like betrayal. It feels like humiliation. Alex's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought he might cry, but I didn't care. He deserved every ounce of pain he was feeling, if not more. I'm going to pack a bag, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I'll be staying with my sister for a while. Wait, he said, his voice panicked. You don't have to leave. We can work this out. Please, don't go. You don't get to ask me for anything, I said coldly. Not after this. I turned and walked away, ignoring his pleas as I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. My hands shook as I packed, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was the first step toward reclaiming my life, toward taking back the control Alex had stolen from me. I drove to my sister Maggie's house in silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. The reality of leaving my home, my marriage, everything I thought I could trust, was overwhelming. But I didn't cry. Not yet. The anger simmering just beneath the surface wouldn't let me. Maggie greeted me at the door, her brow furrowing when she saw my overnight bag. What's going on? She asked, stepping aside to let me in. I can't talk about it yet, I said, my voice trembling. Can I stay here for a while? Of course, she said softly, pulling me into a hug. The warmth of her embrace threatened to crack the wall I had built around my emotions, but I held it together. I couldn't fall apart. Not yet. She led me to the guest room, where I set down my bag and collapsed onto the bed. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the confrontation with Alex. His excuses, his promises, they all felt hollow. Could I really walk away from 15 years of marriage? Or was there still something worth salvaging? Maggie knocked gently on the door, breaking me out of my thoughts. She held 2 mugs of tea, offering one to me as she sat on the edge of the bed. Take your time, she said, but I'm here when you're ready. I nodded, grateful for her patience. We sat in silence for a while, the tea warming my hands as I struggled to find the words. Finally, I said, he's been cheating on me. With a younger woman. Maggie's eyes widened, and her jaw tightened. Alex? That bastard. I nodded, swallowing hard. I found the proof. I confronted him, and he admitted it. What did he say? She asked, her voice tinged with anger. That it wasn't serious. That he didn't mean to hurt me. I let out a bitter laugh. As if that makes it any better. Maggie shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. You don't deserve this. You've been nothing but loyal to him. I thought I knew him, I said, my voice cracking. But now I don't know what's real anymore. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm. You're stronger than this. Don't let him break you. Her words hit me like a lifeline, pulling me out of the depths of my despair. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, a tiny ember of determination that refused to be snuffed out. I need to figure out what to do next, I said, setting down the mug. But right now, I just need some time to breathe. Take all the time you need, she said. This is your space now. As she left the room, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I lay back on the bed, my mind racing with possibilities. Divorce? Counseling? Revenge? The options swirled in my head, each one demanding attention. For now, though, I closed my eyes and let sleep take me. Tomorrow would bring clarity. It had to. The next morning, I woke with a heavy heart but a clearer mind. Maggie was already in the kitchen, frying eggs and humming to herself. Coffee? She asked, glancing over her shoulder. Please, I said, sliding into a chair at the table. She set a mug in front of me, her expression soft. You look better. Did you sleep? Somehow, I said, but now I'm stuck wondering what to do next. Maggie sat down across from me, her eyes narrowing. You said he admitted to the affair, right? What else did he say? That it wasn't serious, that he'd end it and fix everything. I shook my head, the memory of his excuses reigniting my anger. As if words can undo what he did. Do you think he's really done with her? Maggie asked, her tone cautious. I don't know, I admitted, but I can't just take his word for it. She nodded, her lips pursed. Then don't. Find out for yourself. I frowned, unsure of what she meant. How? You said you followed him yesterday, right? You know where she lives, where the car came from. Use that. Dig deeper. Her words made my stomach churn. The thought of diving back into that mess felt overwhelming, but she was right. If I wanted answers, I'd have to get them myself. By midday, I was parked near Erin's house, the car Alex had bought her still sitting in the driveway. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding as I tried to work up the courage to do something. Anything. Finally, I got out of the car and walked up to her door. Before I could second-guess myself, I rang the doorbell. The sound echoed in my ears, and my breath hitched when I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and there she was, Erin. Up close, she looked even younger than I'd imagined, her face fresh and unlined. She seemed surprised to see me, her brow furrowing as she said, Can I help you? I'm Alex's wife, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Her eyes widened, and she stepped back slightly. Oh, yeah. Oh, I said. We need to talk. She hesitated but finally stepped aside, letting me into the house. It was small but stylish, decorated with a care that made me feel oddly out of place. I stood in the entryway, crossing my arms as I waited for her to speak. I didn't know he was married, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't lie to me, I snapped. You knew. You had to. Her face turned red, and she glanced away. I didn't mean for this to happen. That makes two of us, I said bitterly. So, how long has it been going on? She hesitated, then said, a few months. He said things weren't great between you two, that he was unhappy. I clenched my fists, anger bubbling to the surface. Unhappy? I repeated. He didn't seem unhappy when we were building our life together, or when I supported him through every one of his ups and downs. I'm sorry, she said, looking down at the floor. I didn't think. No, you didn't, I said sharply. But you're going to start now. Tell me everything. Erin fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, her face pale as she sat across from me. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the guilt mixing with a tinge of defiance. She wanted to defend herself, but she also knew there was no justification. It started a few months ago, she began, her voice trembling. Alex came into the cafe where I work. We got to talking, and he told me he was in a tough spot. At home, I mean. I clenched my jaw. my nails digging into my palms. And that made it okay to sleep with him? No, she said quickly. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. He made me feel special. The words stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. Special enough for him to buy you a car? I asked, my tone icy. She looked down, ashamed. I didn't ask for it, she said softly. He insisted, said he wanted to take care of me. My stomach turned. Hearing her describe Alex in a way that mirrored how he used to treat me was like reopening an old wound. And you didn't think to ask why a married man was so eager to take care of you? I know it was wrong, she said, tears welling in her eyes. But he told me he was going to leave you, that he just needed time. Of course he did, I said bitterly. They always do, don't they? Erin wiped her eyes, her voice trembling as she added, he said he loved me. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that filled the room. He said that to you too? I shook my head. God, he's good at this, isn't he? Her tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity for her. She was young, naive, and clearly caught up in something far bigger than she'd anticipated. But that didn't excuse her actions. Here's what's going to happen, I said, leaning forward. You're going to stay out of my marriage. Whatever fantasy he sold you, it's over. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear. No, I interrupted. You don't get to speak. You knew he was married, and you let this happen. So now you get to deal with the consequences. End it. Today. She nodded quickly, tears streaming down her face. Okay, she whispered. I'll end it. Good, I said, standing. Because if you don't, you'll regret it. With that, I turned and walked out of her house, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I got back into my car, but I felt a small sense of satisfaction. She wasn't the only one to blame, but at least one piece of this nightmare was dealt with. Driving away, I realized my next confrontation would be the hardest one yet. Alex had dug his grave, and it was time to make sure he stayed in it. I drove back to Maggie's house, my thoughts swirling with the conversation I just had. Confronting Erin had given me a momentary sense of control, but the deeper issue, the betrayal, still loomed like a dark cloud. Alex's actions weren't just a mistake. They were a deliberate series of choices that shattered the trust between us. When I walked through the door, Maggie looked up from the couch, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. You okay? She asked. I confronted her, I said, dropping my purse on the counter. Erin, the girl he's been seeing. Maggie's eyes widened. And she cried, I said with a bitter laugh. Claimed she didn't know he was married at first, then admitted she stayed with him even after she found out. Typical, right? Maggie frowned. So, what now? Are you going to confront Alex again? I nodded, my jaw tightening. This time, I'm not holding back. Maggie stood and placed a hand on my shoulder. Just be careful, okay? Don't let him twist this around on you. Don't worry, I said. I'm done letting him manipulate me. That evening, I called Alex and told him to meet me at the house. We need to talk, I said, keeping my tone neutral. He hesitated. I thought you were staying at Maggie's. I am, I said, but I'll come to the house for this. Be there at 7. When I arrived, Alex was already waiting in the living room, pacing nervously. He looked up as I walked in, his face a mixture of relief and anxiety. Thank you for coming, he said. Save it, I interrupted, closing the door behind me. This isn't a conversation. It's me talking, and you listening. He blinked, clearly taken aback, but he didn't argue. I spoke to her, I said, crossing my arms. Erin, she told me everything. His face paled, and he dropped onto the couch, his hands covering his face. I don't know what to say, he muttered. Don't say anything, I snapped. You've said enough lies already. Let me be clear. Whatever fantasy you had about starting fresh with her is over. I told her it's done, and I'm telling you the same. Alex looked up, his eyes wide with panic. Wait, what do you mean? You're leaving me? I laughed bitterly. You left me the moment you chose her over us. I'm just making it official. He stood, reaching for me, but I stepped back. Please, just listen, he pleaded. It was a mistake. I let things get out of hand, but I can fix this. We can fix this. There's no we anymore, I said coldly. You made sure of that. He sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. I don't want to lose you, he said, his voice breaking. Then you shouldn't have betrayed me, I replied. Actions have consequences, Alex, and yours just caught up to you. I turned and walked out, leaving him sitting in the silence of his own destruction. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't broken anymore. I was free. The drive back to Maggie's house was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the tires against the road. My mind buzzed with everything I had just said to Alex. For years, I had been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and avoided confrontation. But tonight, I had drawn a line, and it felt good. When I walked into the house, Maggie was waiting for me in the kitchen, a glass of wine in her hand. She raised an eyebrow as I dropped my keys on the counter. Well, she asked. It's over, I said simply, pouring myself a glass and joining her at the table. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good. You deserve better. Do I? I asked, the weight of the situation crashing down on me. Because right now, I feel like a fool. Like I should have seen this coming. Stop that, Maggie said firmly. Alex made his choices, and they have nothing to do with your worth. He's the fool, not you. I sipped my wine, her words sinking in. I'm not sure what happens next, I admitted. Divorce? Counseling? I don't even know where to start. You start by taking care of yourself, Maggie said. One step at a time. Figure out what you want before making any decisions. Her words were simple but comforting. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't drowning. I had a plan, even if it was just to take things day by day. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to take a walk. The crisp air and the sound of leaves crunching under my feet helped clear my head. As I walked, I thought about the life I had built with Alex and what it would mean to let it go. There was sadness, yes, but also a sense of possibility. Maybe this was my chance to start over, to rebuild on my terms. When I returned to Maggie's, I sat down with a notebook and started making a list. Practical things like contacting a lawyer and sorting out finances were at the top, but as I wrote, I found myself adding more personal goals. Take a trip, reconnect with old friends, focus on my career. By the time I finished, the page was filled with possibilities, and I felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Alex. Please, let's talk again. I'll do anything to fix this. I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it. There was nothing left to say. He had his chance, and he blew it. That evening, Maggie and I sat on the couch, binge-watching an old sitcom and laughing over a bowl of popcorn. For a few hours, I forgot about Alex and Aaron, about the betrayal and the heartbreak. I just existed in the moment, and it was enough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, I was content. I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to live again. The next day, I called a lawyer. It was strange hearing myself say the words, I'm considering a divorce. They felt heavy, but also liberating. The lawyer, a calm woman named Susan, walked me through the process and assured me I didn't have to make any immediate decisions. This is your time, she said gently. Take things at your own pace. We'll handle the legal side when you're ready. Hanging up the phone, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. I wasn't sure if I was ready for the finality of divorce, but having a professional in my corner made the situation feel less overwhelming. Later that afternoon, Alex called. My phone buzzed on the counter, his name flashing on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before answering. What do you want, Alex? To talk, he said quickly. Please, just hear me out. I sighed, already regretting picking up the call. You had your chance to talk. I told you everything I needed to say. I know, he said, his voice cracking. But I can't let this end like this. We've been through too much together. That's rich, I snapped. You didn't think about everything we've been through when you were sneaking around with Aaron. I made a mistake, he said, his tone desperate. I'm only human. I let out a bitter laugh. That's the problem, Alex. You made a choice, not a mistake. And that choice destroyed us. There was a long pause on the line before he finally said, "I'll do anything to make it right." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "The only way you can make this right is by giving me the space I need. Stop calling, stop texting. Let me figure out what's next without you clouding my judgment." "Is this really what you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's what I need," I said firmly. "Goodbye, Alex." I hung up before he could say anything else, my chest heaving with the effort of staying composed. The conversation had taken more out of me than I'd expected, but it also left me feeling stronger. I was no longer at his mercy. I was reclaiming my power, one step at a time. That evening, I sat down with Maggie and told her about the call. "Do you think I was too harsh?" I asked. "Not at all," she said. "You set a boundary, and that's exactly what you needed to do." I nodded, her words reinforcing my decision. Alex needed to understand that I wasn't his to manipulate anymore. This was my time to heal and rebuild, and I wasn't going to let him derail that. The days that followed were both freeing and terrifying. Without Alex constantly hovering in my thoughts or trying to pull me back into his world, I had space to reflect on my life, my choices, and the future I wanted. The silence was strange at first, but soon, it became a comforting void where I could hear my own thoughts. Maggie encouraged me to take small steps toward rediscovery. "Do something you've always wanted to do but never had the time for," she suggested one morning over coffee. The idea intrigued me. For years, I'd put Alex's needs before my own, always compromising to keep the peace. Now, I could finally focus on myself. I thought about the pottery class I'd once mentioned but never pursued, or the yoga retreat I'd admired from afar. It was time to reclaim those pieces of myself. That weekend, I signed up for a beginner's pottery workshop. Walking into the studio, I felt nervous, like I didn't belong. But as the instructor showed us how to shape the clay, I found myself relaxing. There was something soothing about molding the clay with my hands, watching it take form. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Alex or Aaron or the chaos they had brought into my life. I was just present. The instructor, a kind woman named Carla, walked by and smiled. "You've got a natural touch," she said. I laughed softly. "It's my first time." "Sometimes the first time is when you're closest to the art," she replied. "No expectations, no pressure. Just pure creation." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I'd lived with the weight of expectations, both Alex's and my own. Now, I was learning to let go of that and just exist in the moment. After the class, I felt lighter. I stopped by a cafe on the way home and treated myself to a latte and a slice of cake, something I hadn't done in years. Sitting by the window, watching the world go by, I realized how much of life I had missed while wrapped up in Alex's needs and demands. That evening, Maggie noticed the change in me. "You look different," she said as we sat on the couch watching a movie. "Different how?" I asked. "Lighter. Happier," she said. "Like you're starting to find yourself again." I smiled, her words filling me with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. She was right. I was starting to find myself, and it felt incredible. But I knew the journey wasn't over. There were still practical matters to deal with: finances, the house, and the inevitable legal proceedings. Alex hadn't reached out again, respecting my boundary, but I knew that wouldn't last forever. At some point, I'd have to face him again. For now, though, I allowed myself to revel in the small victories. Every step I took away from the pain was a step closer to the person I wanted to be. 2 weeks passed without a word from Alex. The silence was both a relief and a gnawing reminder that things were far from resolved. I was beginning to feel like I could breathe again, but I knew this calm wouldn't last forever. Then, one afternoon while I was at the grocery store, I saw him. It was like a scene from a movie. I turned the corner into the produce section, and there he was, staring at a display of oranges like they held the answers to the universe. For a moment, I froze, unsure of whether to turn and walk away or confront him. He must have felt my gaze because he looked up, and our eyes locked. "Claire," he said, his voice hesitant. "Hi, Alex." My voice was flat, devoid of the warmth that used to greet him. I stood there, gripping my cart, waiting to see what he would do. He took a tentative step closer. "How are you?" he asked, his tone cautious. "Fine," I replied shortly. "Busy?" He nodded, his hands fidgeting at his sides. "I've missed you." I let out a humorless laugh. "Have you?" "Yes," he said earnestly. "I've been giving you space like you asked, but I've been thinking about us, about what I can do to make things right." My patience, already thin, snapped. "Alex, you can't make things right. You don't get to undo what you did just because you feel guilty now." He flinched at my words but didn't look away. "I know I hurt you, Claire, but I still love you." "Love?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You call what you did love? You lied to me, humiliated me, and broke our marriage. Don't stand here and try to pretend this was anything but selfishness." People were starting to glance in our direction, but I didn't care. Let them stare. Alex needed to hear this. "I've been working on myself," he said, his voice desperate. "I've been seeing a therapist. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did." I shook my head, a bitter smile on my lips. "That's great, Alex. I hope it helps, but it doesn't change what happened." "Please, Claire," he said, his eyes pleading. "Just give me a chance to prove I'm better than this." "No, Alex," I said firmly. "This isn't about you anymore. It's about me, and I'm done giving you chances." I turned and walked away, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to look back, to see if he was watching me leave, but I didn't. I kept walking, pushing my cart toward the checkout line as if I hadn't just blown up years of history in the middle of the produce aisle. Back in my car, I let out a shaky breath. Confronting Alex again hadn't been part of my plan, but I felt stronger for having stood my ground. He could work on himself all he wanted, but I was done being part of his mess. The confrontation at the grocery store left me emotionally drained but resolute. It was time to take the next step, divorce. As much as I had tried to avoid thinking about it, Alex's actions left no room for reconciliation. I needed to sever the ties that bound us, not just emotionally but legally. That evening, I called Susan, the lawyer I'd spoken with before. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. She didn't ask questions, only walked me through the first steps: filing paperwork, gathering financial documents, and determining what I wanted out of the settlement. It was daunting, but Susan's calm demeanor reassured me that I could handle this. The next few days were a blur of organizing and reflecting. Sorting through years of shared finances and belongings felt surreal. Each bank statement, photo, and receipt told a story, a memory of a life I was leaving behind. Some brought tears, others only anger. But through it all, I felt a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about reclaiming my future. Alex must have sensed the shift because he called me late one night. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and when I saw his name, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. "Claire," he said when I picked up, "I need to talk to you." "We have nothing left to talk about," I replied, my voice firm. "Please," he begged, "just hear me out. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I don't want us to end like this." "Alex, we ended the moment you chose her over me," I said. "I've filed for divorce. It's done." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wondered if he had hung up. Then he spoke, his voice low and strained. "I don't want a divorce." "It's not up to you," I said, my tone cold. "You made your choice, Alex. Now I'm making mine. Can we at least meet one last time?" he asked. "Just to talk?" I hesitated, unsure of his motives. Part of me wanted to refuse, to cut him off completely, but another part of me craved closure. "Fine," I said finally. "One meeting. But it won't change anything." "Thank you," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Just tell me when and where." I gave him a time and place, neutral ground at a cafe we used to frequent. As I hung up, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, my heart pounding. Alex was already there, waiting at a table near the window. He looked up as I approached, his face a mixture of hope and regret. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "This isn't a social visit, Alex," I said bluntly. "Say what you need to say." Alex looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of desperation and guilt. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words, his fingers fidgeting with the coffee cup in front of him. I waited, arms crossed, my expression stone cold. "I know I can't undo what I've done," he began, his voice low, "but I need you to know how much I regret it." I said nothing, letting him squirm in the silence. "I was stupid," he continued. "I let my insecurities, my selfishness, everything get in the way of what really matters. You, us." His words might have once made my heart ache with longing, but now they felt hollow. "You should have thought about that before you betrayed me," I said, my tone even. He flinched but pressed on. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But we've been together for so long, Claire. We built a life together. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I stared at him, my emotions a storm beneath the surface. "It meant everything to me, Alex. That's why this hurts so much. I gave you everything, and you threw it away for a fling." "It wasn't like that," he said quickly. "It was a mistake, one I would take back if I could." "You keep calling it a mistake," I said sharply. "But it wasn't. It was a series of choices. You chose to lie to me. You chose to see her. You chose to buy her a car while telling me we couldn't afford new appliances. Do you even hear yourself?" His face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. "I just want another chance," he said, "to prove I can be better, to make this right." I leaned forward, my voice soft but firm. "You don't get another chance, Alex. You don't get to make this right because some things can't be fixed. You broke us, and I won't spend the rest of my life picking up the pieces." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I love you, Claire. I always have." I shook my head, the tears I'd been holding back finally spilling over. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied, cheated, and humiliated me. Love isn't words, Alex. It's actions. And your actions told me everything I need to know." The finality of my words seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He slumped back in his chair, his shoulders sagging. "So that's it?" he asked quietly. "That's it," I said, standing. "I'll see you in court." As I walked away, I felt the weight of our shared history pressing down on me, but with every step, it lifted just a little. By the time I reached my car, I felt lighter, freer. This was the end of us, but it was also the beginning of something new. Something just for me. The divorce process was grueling, but with Susan's help, I navigated it step by step. Alex tried to stall, pleading for reconciliation at every opportunity, but I stood firm. Every meeting, every legal document, and every tense conversation was a reminder of the betrayal I had endured. But it was also a reminder of my strength. Maggie was my rock throughout it all, always there with a bottle of wine or a pep talk when I needed it most. She even came with me to pick up the final paperwork once the divorce was finalized. "This calls for a celebration," she said, handing me a small wrapped box as we sat in her car outside the courthouse. "What's this?" I asked, my brow furrowing. "Open it," she said with a grin. Inside was a keychain with a single word engraved on it: freedom. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh, as I held it up to the light. "Thank you," I said, my voice soft. "You earned it," she replied. "Now, let's go get some margaritas." Over the next few months, I focused on rebuilding my life. I moved out of Maggie's house and into a cozy apartment with big windows that let in the sunlight. I continued my pottery classes and even started selling some of my pieces online. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A small victory in reclaiming the independence I had lost during my marriage. One day, while browsing in a bookstore, I ran into Carla, my pottery instructor. She invited me to join a community art project, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. The friendships I built there became a source of joy and inspiration, filling the void Alex had left behind. As for Alex, he tried reaching out a few more times, but I didn't respond. The past was the past, and I had no intention of revisiting it. Erin, I heard through the grapevine, had moved away. Maybe she was running from her mistakes, or maybe she was just looking for a fresh start like I was. Months turned into a year, and one day, as I sat in my little apartment surrounded by half-finished pottery pieces and the smell of fresh coffee, I realized something. I was happy. Truly, genuinely happy. Not because of anyone else, but because of me. This journey had been painful and messy, but it had also been transformative. I had rediscovered who I was, and I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. Whatever came next, I knew I could handle it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Have you ever faced a betrayal that made you question everything? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience and transformation.